You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So Glenn, in the aftermath of Kari Lake having sued and lost in her effort to just be declared the winner in the 2022 gubernatorial election in Arizona, Governor-elect Katie Hobbs and Maricopa County filed for sanctions against Lake. So what are the sanctions here, and are they strictly monetary, or is there further punishment that could come out of this?
So Governor-elect Katie Hobbs is seeking monetary sanctions. Basically, she's asking the court to order Kari Lake personally, not the taxpayers, to compensate her, Katie Hobbs' lawyers to the tune of more than $500,000. So that's a monetary sanction. The other thing that could happen here is the judge could sua sponte, that is on his own, order that Kari Lake's lawyers be referred to bar counsel for investigation of possible misconduct. Perhaps the attorneys will be sanctioned by the bar, and that could obviously include being disbarred if the abuse of the process and the system is deemed to be egregious enough.
And now, these sanctions are paid by Kari Lake herself, correct? This isn't funded by any Arizona taxpayers, is it?
Well, Kari Lake, of course, she is already out there trying to raise money for her attorney's bills. Where have we heard that sort of thing before? Of course, we also hear her say things like, that the Maricopa County election officials should be locked up. And she ran as an election denier. She brought a frivolous challenge claiming the election has been rigged. Really, all that seems to be left for Kari Lake is a bad blonde comb over and a really nasty orange spray tan, and her metamorphosis into Trump may be complete.
In effect, the people who've donated to Kari Lake, the people who you're referring to, are basically just funding a completely doomed effort to try and overturn the election. Like, these people are basically just setting their money on fire because there's no way that this trial would have gone any other way, correct?
Yeah, and this is the third. This is really a hat trick of lost lawsuits that have been brought challenging Arizona election results. There was one brought by the Republican candidate for Attorney General, one brought by the Republican candidate for Secretary of State. This is the third time an Arizona court has ruled there was no election fraud. In fact, Judge Thompson, who presided over the Kari Lake trial, the Kari Lake challenge, ruled that nobody who wanted to cast a vote was unable to cast a vote. All votes were counted, even if there were some mechanical malfunctions or glitches on the day of the election. None of it impacted the election's results.
As far as the sanctions are concerned, what's the timeline here? How long are we going to have to wait before we find out the results of this, of this case, and also whether the judge would go about this himself if there isn't any effort by Katie Hobbs or Maricopa County to recover this money?
I have a feeling the judge will rule on the motions for sanctions pretty quickly. If I had to guess, within a couple of weeks, we'll probably have a ruling. And then, undoubtedly, Kari Lake's attorneys will appeal any adverse ruling up to the appellate court, which I think will be a doomed endeavor. I think at the end of the day, Kari Lake will have to shell out more than $500,000 for the frivolous challenge she brought to the results of the Arizona election.
If they appeal this stuff and they rack up more fees, isn't that just going to add to a sum total that she'll eventually have to pay out at the end of this if she continues losing?
That's a great question. If you have been found to bring a frivolous lawsuit such that a judge orders legal fees, to go to your opponent's lawyers, it's an interesting question about whether an appeal would be deemed as being taken in bad faith. I have a feeling the appellate court, now this is kind of uncharted waters, but I have a feeling the appellate court would say, no, the litigants get to appeal an adverse ruling, even if that adverse ruling is you brought a frivolous suit, and because of that, it's within the judge's discretion, but because of that, the judge ordered that you have to pay your opponent's legal fees. I don't think they would give them a double hit by then ordering that Kari Lake's lawyers would have to, or Kari Lake would have to pay the legal fees for the opponents on appeal. I have a feeling that would probably be a legal bridge too far.
How do you reconcile basically preventing these frivolous lawsuits from being filed with the fact that people do have the right to file suit in our courts, and that stuff is litigated in the courtroom, whether or not they win or not, whether or not they win is up to the judge or the jury, but how do you reconcile that prior to going into the courtroom?
Yeah, it's a tough question because you never want to sort of chill litigants from bringing legal suits that might not be the strongest, but that really do warrant being brought in court to kind of hash out the factual and legal issues involved. But I think the way you deter sort of transparently frivolous suits that are brought for public relations value, not because there's any substantial evidence that supports the bringing of the lawsuit, is precisely the way the judge in Arizona has ruled. The judge, after a 2-day trial, very quickly, expeditiously rejected Kari Lake's attack on the results of the Arizona election, and now is promptly taking up more than $500,000 in possible sanctions. That is the way you deter it. Because if the message you're sending to the legal community or to nefarious litigants is this is what's going to happen to you and it's going to happen promptly, that's the way you deter frivolous suits from being filed.
Okay, got it. Let's finish off with this. Do you think that in the future this makes Kari Lake a more viable Republican candidate because she's basically, espousing pure Trumpism? Or do you think this makes her a less viable candidate for the exact same reason, because she's espousing pure Trumpism?
Yeah, you're the political expert and the political analyst. I try not to play one on TV, but to this voters' thinking, this has to make her a less appealing candidate. She ran as an election denier and she lost by more than 17,000 votes. She then brought a frivolous lawsuit and she's going to be probably slammed with more than $500,000 in fees that she's going to have to pay to her opponent's lawyers. That stings a little. I can't imagine this makes her a more appealing candidate to anybody but perhaps Donald Trump's sort of most fervent supporters who really don't care much about issues. They don't care much about whether politicians are actually going to make their lives any better. They just like somebody who's in there fighting, and I think they like it a little bit more when they're fighting dirty. So maybe that's who a Kari Lake would appeal to moving forward in the world of politics.
Yeah, but like you said, it's hard to imagine this would make her a more viable candidate if not only Donald Trump, but Trumpism, it was a losing proposition in 2018 during the big blue wave, in 2020 when Trump himself lost, and even while a bunch of Republicans still won, and now in 2022 where Republicans didn't do poorly except for those election deniers who ran in battleground states for governor and secretary of state and lost across the board. Wasn't a single Republican MAGA candidate who was running on election denialism that won in any of these battleground states. So if that doesn't show these voters, these Kari Lake voters, these Trump voters out there, that this is just not a winning proposition, that this is just a fast track to losing your election, even in a good year for Republicans, I don't know what will. So with that said, there's never really been this hasn't really been a fast track to logic, so we'll see what happens moving forward. So with that said, Glenn, thank you for joining. Anybody watching that wants to keep up on legal news, you can follow both me and Glenn. Our links to our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.